The 1920s in Canada were a time of major technological innovation, a time of great social change in Canadian lifestyles, and a vital time in Canadian politics. In this video, we are going to be focusing more so on the political aspect of the 1920s in Canada.
What is the Liberal Party? The Liberal Party of Canada is a political party that believes in liberalism, or freedom and equality for all. Why was the Liberal Party important? The Liberal Party was important because it was the political party that promised to learn from the mistakes of the Unionist Party, which was the government before the elections. And then they blamed them for several different things. This made the Liberal Party seem much more promising for the voters at the time. During the 1920s, there were many elections, and the Liberals had won most of them. For example, they had a minority government in 1921, and they had also won the elections in 1925. But William Lyon Mackenzie King was not able to be Prime Minister because of the King Byng affair, which caused Arthur Maine, the leader of the Conservatives, to be the Prime Minister. And then in 1926, the Liberals had then again won the election and held a minority government until 1930. What was the Liberal strategy? William Lyon Mackenzie King, or the leader of the Liberals' winning strategy, was to blame the Unionist government for their actions, which include but were not limited to poor war effort, the Depression, and winning through corrupt means. After 1921, King had been elected again and again, mostly because of his lower taxes for the general public and his support for the businesses, but he was unpopular and disliked in the West because of his support for the tariffs.
Originally passed in 1876 under John A. Macdonald, the Indian Act was a prime statute through which the Canadian government virtually controlled the Aboriginal nation in Canada. The Act's existence was needed due to prior legal arrangements, such as the Royal Proclamation of 1763 and various other treaties. Because Canada's constitution specifically assigns native issues to the federal rather than provincial governments, the Indian Act created a definitive national policy on the subject. The main purpose of this act was to integrate Aboriginal society into the Euro-Canadian society through the use of cultural genocide against the Aboriginal peoples. The Indian Act played a detrimental role in Canadian identity due to the transgression of human rights and the systematic eradication of the Aboriginal culture. The Indian Act is still in effect today and is through which the federal government administers Indian status, local First Nations governments, and the management of reserve land. The harshest consequence of the Act came in 1920, when it was made mandatory for all Aboriginal families to send their children to residential schools. Like the Indian Act in general, residential schools were introduced to eliminate Aboriginal culture. Students were not allowed to speak or write in their own language. They were indoctrinated with European culture and very badly mistreated. Out of the 150,000 attending the school, over 4,000 Aboriginals died, and it left a long-lasting scar on many Aboriginal generations. Today, the Indian Act prevents Aboriginals living on a reserve from owning their own property, and they have to rely on their leaders and politicians to grant them housing. They are prohibited from acquiring mortgage, a business loan, or even leasing a car. Aboriginals can't sell meat or agricultural produce off the reserve without special government approval.
The rise and fall of the One Big Union. The One Big Union allowed workers to have a voice to express their demands, emphasized the idea of equality and fairness, and had set an example for the future of industrial unionism. The One Big Union was founded in Calgary, Alberta in March 1919. Who was involved in the One Big Union? Workers who belonged to several different unions were involved. Rise of the One Big Union. The idea of joining unions together soon became popular after World War I. Many leaders decided to branch into the One Big Union. The Canadian workers started demanding 8-hour workdays, recognition of their unions, and improved wages. They wanted equality and fairness and were against those who denied. Their ideas and beliefs were similar to those who were involved in the Communist Russian Revolution. Many people, including the government, suspected them and harassed them. The One Big Union workers supported the idea of general strikes. Does the One Big Union still impact Canadian politics today? The One Big Union was dissolved in 1956, therefore does not directly impact politics but has long-lasting effects. For example, the later successful idea of industrial unionism. The fall of the One Big Union. In 1919, its membership was at its peak, but gradually started decreasing as employees refused to bargain with the One Big Union representatives. They were prosecuted by general employers, media, government, and even by other unions. At the time, almost most of its members were Winnipeg Transit System workers, and as a result, in 1956, it completely merged with the Canadian Labour Congress.
The League of Nations. Canada was impacted and played a big role in the League of Nations because it was one of the founding members of the association, it was permitted to be an independent member, and the country sat on the council of the League for many years. Who were the original members of the League? The founding members of the League of Nations included 42 countries of the world, including Canada. What was the purpose of creating the League of Nations? After the World War I ended, the whole world was impacted, and in order to avoid any future events such as the war, American President Woodrow Wilson suggested the idea of creating an association of the nations that would work together to maintain peace. Hence, 42 countries of the world came together to create the League of Nations. The League's purpose was to prevent any wars from breaking out in the future, ensuring peace. In the League of Nations, Canada was permitted to be an independent and a voting member, separate from Britain. This was an opportunity for Canada to represent itself individually on the world stage. How was Canada involved in the League? Canada served on the Council of the League of Nations from 1927 to 1930. Canada also participated in many of the League's missions throughout the years. Raoul Dandurand was a Canadian representative on the Council, and in 1929 he proposed strengthening the procedures of the League in overseeing the treatment of linguistic and indigenous minorities in Eastern Europe. This proposition was successful, making Canada's respect grow in the eyes of other members of the League as an individual country and not under the British Empire.